I was 48 when a surgeon told me that the mass on my left kidney was almost certainly cancer, and the first number that frightened me was not the size of the tumor, the survival rate, or the date of the operation, but $7,399, because that was the amount the hospital wanted before they would schedule the surgery, and it was also the exact amount my daughter, who earned more from one perfume campaign than I made in 4 months, refused to lend me. My name is Robert Hale. I worked as the maintenance supervisor for a regional food warehouse outside Columbus, Ohio, and I had spent most of my adult life believing that if you showed up, paid what you owed, and did not make your problems everybody else's responsibility, your family would remember that when you finally needed something. I was not poor, but I was not wealthy either. I owned a small 2-bedroom house with 15 years left on the mortgage, drove a 9-year-old Ford, and had a retirement account that looked respectable until you remembered it was supposed to support an entire old age rather than one bad medical year. My daughter, Madison, was 27 and had been working as a commercial model since she was 19. She was not the kind of celebrity who got recognized in every airport, but she had enough campaigns, sponsored posts, catalog work, and beauty contracts to live in a downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, lease a white Range Rover, and pay an assistant to organize clothes she wore once. People online called her self-made, which always made me smile in a tired way, because I remember driving her to unpaid test shoots before sunrise, paying for headshots when I was already behind on property taxes, and sleeping in my truck outside a studio in Chicago because I could not afford a hotel after buying her train ticket home. Her husband, Luke, was 30 and had none of Madison's polish. He had trained as an electrician, worked for a small contractor, and spent the previous year trying to recover after the company he worked for collapsed without paying several employees their final wages. He picked up side jobs, delivered groceries at night, repaired appliances for cash, and wore the same brown work boots until the soles separated. Madison often introduced him as an entrepreneur, because saying struggling electrician did not fit the life she displayed online, while Luke usually let her talk because he loved her and because arguing in public embarrassed him more than being misrepresented. My wife, Ellen, died when Madison was 14, after a drunk driver crossed the center line on a wet road. That detail matters because Madison and I had once been unusually close, not in the sentimental way people describe after relationships have already broken, but in the practical way two frightened people become a team when there is no one else in the house. She slept on the couch outside my room for months because she was afraid I would disappear too, and I learned to braid hair badly, sign permission slips, answer questions about periods without making her ashamed, and sit through dance competitions where every routine looked identical to me but mattered completely to her. When modeling started to work, our relationship changed so slowly that neither of us named it. At first she called after every audition, then only after jobs, then mostly when she needed tax records, storage space, a signature, or a reminder of a date from childhood that she wanted to include in an interview. I told myself adulthood was supposed to create distance, and I was proud enough of her success that I treated every uncomfortable change as the cost of raising an independent child. The cancer began as blood in my urine, which I ignored for 3 weeks because I had helped replace a compressor at work and convinced myself I had strained something. When it happened again, darker and impossible to explain, I went to urgent care, then to a urologist, then into a CT scanner where the technician became careful with her face in the way medical workers do when they know something but are not allowed to tell you. The tumor was small enough that the surgeon believed he could remove only part of the kidney, and he said the outlook was good if we moved quickly. I heard the words, good outlook, and should be curable, but I also heard the part about waiting too long, because my insurance year had recently restarted, and the deductible, coinsurance, imaging balance, and surgical deposit landed on me all at once. I had about $3,000 available after paying for the scans, and another $2,000 in savings that I tried not to touch, because the furnace had started making a noise like loose metal. I could borrow against my retirement account, but the paperwork would take time, and the surgeon's next opening was in 12 days. The hospital finance office said they could reduce the deposit if I proved hardship, but my income was slightly above the threshold, which was one of those situations where you earn too much to qualify for help and not enough to absorb the bill. I did not call Madison first. I called the credit union, asked about a personal loan, and learned that my recent medical charges had pushed my credit utilization high enough to affect the rate. I called my brother, who had 2 children in college, and apologized before I even finished explaining. I asked the hospital whether I could sign a payment plan on the remaining amount, and they said the surgeon's group required the deposit because too many patients had defaulted. I finally called Madison on a Tuesday afternoon while sitting in my truck behind the warehouse. And I kept the conversation simple because I did not want fear to sound like pressure. I told her the diagnosis, the planned surgery, the amount, and the fact that I would repay her within 6 months after taking a retirement loan if necessary. She went quiet, then asked whether I had checked every other option. I said I had. She asked whether the surgery was truly urgent or whether the doctor was using urgency to collect faster. That question hurt, but I answered it. I told her the tumor was probably contained, which was exactly why delaying made no sense. She said she had taxes due, her agency had delayed payment on 2 campaigns, and Luke's work had been inconsistent. She also said that lending money inside families created resentment, and that her therapist had encouraged her to stop becoming financially responsible for other adults. I reminded her that I was not asking for a gift. She said the distinction did not matter if repayment became impossible because I got sicker. I can still remember the sound of a forklift reversing near my truck while she said that, because ordinary noises sometimes attach themselves to sentences that divide your life into before and after. I asked whether she was saying no, and she said she loved me but could not rescue me from a lack of planning. I did not argue. I told her I understood, ended the call, and sat there until my radio buzzed because a loading dock door had jammed. That evening Madison posted photographs from a jewelry launch in Miami. She wore a silver dress, held a glass beside a rooftop pool, and thanked a luxury hotel for the suite. I knew sponsored travel did not always mean she had cash available, and I tried to be fair even while feeling humiliated, but one of the photographs showed a new watch from the campaign, and the brand's website listed it at more than $12,000. Luke called me the next morning. He did not begin with an apology on Madison's behalf or ask whether I had misunderstood. He said she told him about the surgery after they argued, and he wanted to know whether the amount was really $7,399. I said yes. He asked for the hospital's payment instructions. I told him no. He said he was not asking whether I felt comfortable. He was asking where to send it. I knew enough about their finances to understand that Luke did not have that kind of money sitting in an account, and I told him I would not let him take a high-interest loan or empty money they needed for rent. He said they had separate accounts for personal income, a joint account for household bills, and a small emergency fund, but Madison controlled most of the money connected to her work because her accountant managed it through a company. He had $2,100 saved, a motorcycle worth around $3,000, and tools he could sell without losing his regular job. I told him that selling work tools to pay my surgery would be insane. He said watching me delay cancer treatment while everyone pretended the problem belonged to somebody else would be worse. We argued for 20 minutes. He finally said he had spent 3 years being treated like the poor relative in a marriage where his wife photographed meals he could not afford, and if he wanted to use what little he owned to help the man who had always treated him with respect, that was his decision. I agreed only after we wrote a simple loan document stating the amount, repayment schedule, and interest at the federal minimum rate because I wanted it clear that I was borrowing money, not accepting his life as a sacrifice. Luke laughed when I insisted on notarizing it, but he met me at the credit union 2 days later with a cashier's check. He had sold the motorcycle to a coworker, cashed out the small emergency fund, and sold a set of specialty testing equipment he had bought when he still hoped to start his own business. The final few $100s came from 3 nights of delivery work and money he had saved for new boots. I took the check with both hands because one hand was shaking. The surgery was scheduled. Madison found out when the hospital called Luke's number to confirm a payment detail, and the argument that followed became the first public crack in their marriage. She called me screaming that I had manipulated him, that I knew he was desperate to feel useful, and that I had taken money from a man who was already failing to provide for his own household. I told her Luke had made a decision after I repeatedly said no. She said I was enjoying the chance to make her look heartless. I had not told anyone she refused. I had not even told my brother the full story, but Madison lived so much of her life in front of an audience that she assumed every private event already had viewers. Luke later told me she threw his keys across the kitchen, called the motorcycle sale financial abuse, and demanded that he cancel the hospital payment. When he explained that the money had already cleared, she told him to leave the apartment for the night. He slept in his work van. 3 days before surgery, Madison posted a video about family boundaries. She never named me, but she described an older relative who had ignored his health for years, expected a younger woman to finance the consequences, and then recruited her husband to punish her when she said no. Her followers praised her for protecting herself from manipulation. Some said parents who expect adult children to pay medical bills are narcissists. A few suggested the older relative was probably exaggerating the diagnosis. The video received more than 1 million views. I watched only the first minute because my coworker sent it to me with a message asking whether everything was all right. I told him it was family business and went back to reviewing a maintenance schedule, but by lunch, 3 people at work knew, and one had found an old article about Madison where I was quoted saying I had sacrificed everything for her career. The humiliation was not that strangers believed I was irresponsible. The humiliation was realizing my daughter had turned my cancer into content before asking whether I was afraid. Luke called her from the parking lot of a grocery store and told her to remove the video. She refused and said she had not identified me. He said everyone who followed her knew her mother was dead, knew I was her only living parent, and could calculate who she meant. She accused him of choosing me because he resented her success. That was when he first asked whether she actually had no money available. She said her business finances were complicated. He asked to see them. She told him he had no right to audit her career. Their marriage had always contained an imbalance, but until that week, Luke had treated the imbalance as temporary and private. He paid half the rent from irregular income, even when half represented nearly everything he earned, while Madison paid through her company and called the apartment a business expense because she filmed there. She bought clothing, meals, travel, and cosmetic treatments through brand arrangements that made her life look richer than the cash entering their household, so Luke accepted that appearances could be misleading. Then he saw a bank notification on a tablet they shared. A campaign payment of $18,600 had arrived 2 days before I asked for help. Madison had transferred $15,000 into an account he did not recognize. When he confronted her, she said it was reserved for taxes and agency expenses. He asked why the account was in her name, and the name of her manager, Victor Lang. She said Victor helped separate business funds. Luke did not like Victor. Nobody who met him for more than 10 minutes did, but he was useful, connected, and skilled at speaking to people as if they should be grateful he remembered their names. He had managed Madison for 4 years, encouraged her to turn personal stories into engagement, and frequently stayed in their apartment when travel ran late because hotels were expensive, though somehow that concern never applied when a brand was paying. Luke asked Madison directly whether she was sleeping with Victor. She slapped him. He did not hit her back. He left, called me from his van, and said he thought his marriage was ending. I was 2 days away from cancer surgery, but I drove to the parking lot where he was sitting because there are moments when your own fear has to move aside long enough to make room for somebody else's. He showed me the red mark near his mouth and kept defending her even while describing what happened, saying she had panicked, saying he should not have accused her without proof, saying stress made people act outside themselves. I recognized the language because I had used similar explanations for Madison since she was a teenager. I told him love could explain why he wanted to understand her, but it did not require him to pretend she had not struck him. He slept at my house that night on the couch, where Madison used to wait for me after her mother died. The operation lasted a little over 3 hours. The surgeon removed the tumor with part of the kidney and told Luke, who was listed as my contact, that it looked localized. The final pathology would take several days, but there was no obvious spread. Madison arrived after I woke. She wore a baseball cap, large sunglasses, and a cream coat that made her look ready for an airport photograph rather than a surgical ward. Victor came with her and waited near the elevators. She hugged me carefully, cried, and said she had been terrified. For a few minutes, I let myself believe fear had broken through whatever performance had replaced the daughter I knew. Then she asked whether she could take one photograph of our hands for a private update. I said no. She said people were worried. I asked which people. She said her audience had misunderstood the video and she wanted to show that our family was together. That was the first time I understood she did not come only because I had cancer. She came because the story had begun hurting her. Luke stood near the window and said nothing, but Madison looked at him with such hatred that the room changed. She accused him of telling me about their argument. He said I had seen the mark on his face. She said he wanted me to think she was violent, then turned to me and said Luke was unstable, jealous, and obsessed with bringing her down. I was still connected to a catheter and pain pump, and my daughter was trying to recruit me into her marriage before I could sit upright. I asked Victor to leave the hallway and told Madison that if she wanted to stay, she had to stop talking about her image, her marriage, or anything except the medical situation. She left instead. That night, while Luke slept in the chair beside my bed, a fundraiser appeared online under the title, Help Robert Beat Kidney Cancer. It used a photograph of me walking Madison down the aisle, described me as a widowed father who had sacrificed everything for his daughter, and said the family faced overwhelming medical costs. The organizer was Madison's business assistant. The goal was $50,000. By morning, it had raised more than $11,000. I called Madison and told her to take it down because I had not authorized it. She said the money could repay Luke and cover my recovery. I asked why she had refused $7,399 privately, but felt comfortable asking strangers for $50,000 publicly. She said those were different things, because crowdfunding allowed people to contribute voluntarily. I said I had not volunteered to become a campaign. She told me not to sabotage Help because of pride. The fundraiser remained active. I contacted the platform, submitted proof of identity, and explained that the patient had not approved the campaign. They paused withdrawals, but did not immediately remove the page because the organizer claimed to be acting with family permission. Luke then discovered something worse. Madison had recorded a sponsored skincare video in the hospital parking garage after leaving my room. In it, she said the previous week had reminded her that health mattered more than success, and she announced that a portion of sales from a promotional code would support my recovery. There was no written agreement stating what portion, where the money would go, or whether I had consented. Her comments filled with praise. A cancer nonprofit reposted the video. I wanted to scream, but every movement hurt, so I lay in bed and watched my daughter build a reputation for generosity around money she had refused to lend and a surgery her husband had paid for by selling his tools. The pathology confirmed stage 1 renal cell carcinoma with clear margins. I would need scans, follow-up appointments, and monitoring, but no chemotherapy or radiation at that time. That was the best result available, and for several hours, relief pushed everything else away. Luke took me home, filled prescriptions, changed dressings, cooked food badly, and slept on the couch because my bedroom was upstairs and I could not manage the steps. He missed work, which meant he lost pay, but he refused to leave until my brother could stay during the day. Madison sent flowers from a luxury florist with a card signed by her and Victor. She did not visit. The fundraiser reached $38,000 before the platform froze it completely. Nobody had withdrawn the donations yet, but Madison posted that administrative issues were delaying access to funds needed for my care. Her followers began searching for ways to send money directly. Someone found my home address. Cards, checks, supplements, religious pamphlets, and packages began arriving. One person drove 6 hours and knocked on my door because she wanted to pray over me. Another sent a message asking why I was ungrateful to a daughter who had done everything to save me. I wrote a short public statement saying the surgery had been paid, I had not authorized fundraising, and donors should request refunds. Madison called within 5 minutes. She said I had destroyed her credibility during the most important campaign year of her career. I said she had used my diagnosis without permission. She said I was punishing her because Luke chose me. I asked whether she was having an affair with Victor. She hung up. The truth came from her assistant, Nina, who was 23, underpaid, and suddenly afraid she would be blamed for the fundraiser. Nina contacted Luke and provided emails showing that Madison and Victor had planned the campaign before my surgery, not simply as emergency help, but as a way to repair the backlash from the Boundaries video. One email from Victor said the father story had emotional range and could shift Madison from luxury into resilience without damaging her premium image. Another said they should not pay the hospital directly because receipts would limit flexibility. Madison replied that Luke had already handled the deposit, so any donations could cover content production, lost work, and family support. Family support meant Madison's company. They planned to use part of the money to cover an overdue agency advance, a canceled Fashion Week trip, and a lease payment on the Range Rover. There were also messages between Madison and Victor that were not professional. They had been sleeping together for at least 7 months. Luke read the messages at my kitchen table while I sat across from him with surgical tape still pulling at my skin. He did not cry at first. He kept scrolling, checking dates, matching trips, and discovering that some nights Madison claimed to be working late. Victor had been in hotel rooms booked through her company. Then he found a message sent the morning he sold his motorcycle. Madison wrote that Luke was doing his working-class hero routine again and would probably expect praise for saving my father. Victor replied that useful men often confuse being needed with being loved. Madison sent a laughing emoji. Luke put the tablet down and walked outside. I heard him being sick beside the garage. I wish I could say I focused only on his pain, but part of me felt something darker, a mean satisfaction that the person who had made me feel disposable was finally exposed as cruel in a way even she could not reframe. I hated that feeling, and still had it. Luke filed for divorce 2 weeks later. Madison responded by accusing him publicly of financial control, emotional abuse, and leaking private material to damage her career. She posted photographs of the nearly empty joint account after he paid my surgery, without explaining that most of her income sat in separate business accounts. She showed the bruise on her hand from slapping him and suggested he had caused it. Luke's attorney told him to say nothing online. Silence looked like guilt. Several brands suspended work with him even though he had no connection to their contracts, because Madison's followers identified his employer and flooded the company's pages with accusations. His boss reduced his hours, saying he believed Luke, but could not manage the attention. Victor sent Luke a message saying he should sign a quick settlement before the story became worse. Luke drove to Madison's apartment to collect clothes, while a neutral friend waited downstairs, but Victor was there. The building camera later showed Victor following Luke into the hallway and blocking the elevator. There was no sound, but Luke said Victor called him a parasite, told him Madison had carried him for years, and demanded the tablet containing the messages. Luke refused. Victor grabbed his jacket. Luke pushed him away. Victor swung first and struck Luke near the ear. Luke hit him once in return, hard enough to split Victor's lip. Then Victor stumbled into a decorative console and broke a glass lamp. Madison filmed only the final seconds, showing Victor bleeding and Luke standing over him. Police arrived, reviewed the hallway camera, and interviewed everyone. Victor declined medical transport. Neither man was charged that night, though a report documented mutual combat after Victor initiated physical contact. Madison posted the cropped video before the police finished taking statements. For 48 hours, Luke became the violent husband of a successful model. Then the building manager released the full hallway footage to police, Luke's lawyer obtained it, and one news site published a description confirming Victor had blocked the elevator, grabbed Luke, and struck first. The same site also reported the unauthorized cancer fundraiser and the affair allegations. The scandal moved faster than any of us could control. Sponsors dropped Madison. Others paused contracts. The cancer nonprofit deleted its repost and issued a statement saying it had not received donations from her campaign. The crowdfunding platform refunded contributors and banned the organizer's account after reviewing the internal emails. Madison blamed Nina for stealing confidential records. Nina hired a lawyer and produced messages showing Victor instructed her to create the page, use my wedding photograph, and describe the funds vaguely. I did not press criminal charges because the money had been frozen before anyone withdrew it, but the State Attorney General's Consumer Office opened a review after donors complained. Madison eventually signed an agreement requiring her company to disclose sponsored charitable claims clearly and pay a civil penalty. It was not prison, not a dramatic courtroom, and not the destruction people online demanded, but it placed her name beside the word deceptive in a public document brands could find. During all of this, my medical bills continued arriving. The $7,399 deposit had not covered anesthesia, pathology, imaging, or follow-up care. Insurance adjustments lowered some amounts and created others. I returned to work earlier than my doctor preferred because paid leave ran out, then discovered I could not climb ladders or lift equipment without pain. Luke had fewer hours and legal bills. Still, he never asked for the loan payment early. I began repaying him $200 at a time, sometimes $100, because I refused to let his sacrifice become another vague family debt everyone expected him to absorb. He used the first payments to buy back basic tools from the coworker who had purchased them, though the motorcycle was gone. Madison and I did not speak for 3 months. My brother said I should call because she was losing everything at once. I told him she was losing contracts, a marriage, and control of a story, while Luke had lost savings, tools, work, and a wife after paying for my cancer surgery, so I was not ready to make her distress the center of the family again. That sounded cruel. It was also true. The next turn came from Madison's pregnancy test. She sent me a photograph of it without any message. I called because whatever else had happened, she was still my daughter, and the possibility of a grandchild reached a part of me anger had not killed. She said she was around 7 weeks pregnant and did not know whether Luke or Victor was the father. The timing overlapped. She was crying in a way I had not heard since Ellen died, without controlled pauses or the polished language she used online. She said Luke would never forgive her. Victor had stopped answering private calls, and she was terrified the pregnancy would become another public scandal. I told her not to post anything, not to contact brands, and not to make a decision based on what strangers might say. She asked whether I hated her. I said I hated what she had done. She asked whether that was different. I said it had to be, or neither of us had anywhere to go. Madison went to an obstetric appointment alone. Victor sent an assistant to ask for proof before he would discuss paternity. Luke agreed to provide a sample later if needed, but made clear that a biological connection would not restore the marriage. For 2 weeks, the pregnancy existed as the one subject that forced all of us into the same emotional room. I wanted the child to be healthy. Luke wanted clarity and still worried about Madison despite everything. Madison shifted between hoping Luke was the father because he was decent and hoping Victor was the father because admitting the truth might save her relationship with the man she had chosen. Then she began bleeding. She called Luke first. He drove her to the emergency room and stayed until a doctor confirmed the pregnancy was no longer viable. Nobody said stress caused it. The doctor explained that early miscarriages were common and usually connected to factors no one could control, but facts did not stop Madison from looking for a person to blame. She blamed the scandal, then Luke, then Victor, then me. She said if I had accepted her original refusal quietly, none of the public conflict would have happened. Luke stood beside the hospital bed and told her the pregnancy ended because pregnancies sometimes end, while the marriage ended because she made decisions repeatedly. She threw a plastic cup at him. A nurse asked him to leave. He left. I stayed for an hour, though Madison barely looked at me. Part of me wanted to comfort the child I raised, and another part wanted to tell her grief did not erase what she had done. I said neither. I sat in the chair and listened to the monitor until her friend arrived. The miscarriage became the moment when public opinion shifted again, because Madison posted a black screen saying she had lost a baby during the most abusive period of her life. She did not name us, but the implication was obvious. This time, the response was not entirely supportive. Too many facts had already emerged. People asked whether she was using another medical event for engagement. Others defended her right to speak about loss. Some comments were vicious enough that I reported them, even though they targeted the person who had hurt me. I learned then that refusing to protect someone from consequences is not the same as enjoying cruelty toward them. Victor issued a statement denying involvement in her personal life beyond professional management. Madison released messages proving the affair. His agency fired him. He sued her for breach of confidentiality and later withdrew the case when discovery threatened to expose more. Luke completed the divorce without asking for spousal support, though his attorney believed he might have had a claim because of the income difference. He wanted repayment of the emergency fund, half of specific household property, and protection from Madison's company debts. He moved into a small apartment above a tire shop and took a maintenance position at a hospital, which paid less than his old trade work, but included steady hours and health insurance. I finished repaying the $7,399 11 months after surgery. For the final payment, I gave him a check for $899, and the notarized loan document marked paid in full. He looked at it, then at me, and said I was the only person in the family who had ever treated his money like it mattered because it came from his life, not because of the amount. That sentence stayed with me. Madison's career did not vanish, but it shrank. Luxury brands avoided her for a while, and she moved towards smaller catalog jobs, regional campaigns, and subscription content managed without Victor. She sold the Range Rover, left the downtown apartment, and rented a place near my neighborhood where nobody cared that she once had a billboard in Times Square. The first time she came to my house after the divorce, she stood in the kitchen where Luke had read the affair messages and asked whether I thought he would ever speak to her again. I said probably, but not in the way she wanted. She asked whether I had chosen him over her. I said he gave up nearly everything he had when I needed surgery, while she had enough money to help, and chose to build content around refusing. So I was not going to pretend both actions deserved equal loyalty simply because she was my child. She cried, but she did not leave. That was new. She told me she had been angry when I asked for money, because the request made her feel dragged back into the years when we counted every grocery item after her mother died. Success had become proof that she escaped that life, and my illness made her feel the old fear returning. Her therapist had indeed discussed boundaries, but Madison used that language to justify panic and selfishness, rather than admitting she was afraid. I believed her. Fear explained the first refusal better than cruelty did. It did not explain the video, the fundraiser, the affair, the lies about Luke, or the plan to use donations for business costs. She said she knew. I asked whether she understood why Luke could not be the person who taught her how to change. She said she did not want to understand that. Over the next year, our relationship became smaller and more honest. We met for coffee, not holidays. She came to one scan and kept her phone in her bag. I helped her move a table but did not pay her deposit. She apologized to Luke in writing without asking for forgiveness, though he waited months before replying. My scans remained clear. I returned to full duty slowly, then moved into a planning role because my body no longer tolerated emergency repairs the way it once had. The change reduced overtime but gave me evenings back, and I used some of them to help Luke study for a licensing exam he had postponed during the divorce. He passed. He later started a small electrical service with another technician, using second-hand tools and a van with faded lettering. The business was not glamorous, but it was his, and when he paid himself the first full week's wage, he sent me a photograph of the deposit receipt because he knew I would understand what it meant. Madison eventually returned to steady work, though her public image never fully recovered. She stopped discussing family online and deleted most videos involving my illness. She could not remove every copy, and sometimes strangers still messaged me asking whether I had forgiven my selfish daughter or whether I had manipulated her husband. I stopped answering. There was one final piece of ugliness that I did not learn until much later. During the months before my diagnosis, Madison and Victor had discussed buying out a small beauty brand, and they expected Luke to sign as a personal guarantor because his credit score was better than hers after several business leases. The $15,000 transfer she called tax money had actually been a deposit connected to that deal. Victor told her not to let Luke know until documents were ready because he would ask nervous working-class questions. She planned to present the guarantee as a routine marital signature. My surgery disrupted the timing because Luke sold assets, checked accounts, and finally started asking where money went. In other words, when he gave me everything he had, he did not only help remove my cancer, his decision accidentally exposed a plan that could have left him responsible for hundreds of thousands of dollars after Madison and Victor moved forward without him. Luke's lawyer found the draft guarantee in the same email archive as the fundraiser messages. Nothing had been signed, so there was no legal case, but the discovery ended whatever doubt he still carried about the divorce. When Madison admitted she knew about the draft, I asked whether she ever intended to tell him. She said she believed the brand would succeed and the risk would never become real. That was the same logic she had used with my surgery. If the worst outcome did not happen, then the person carrying the risk was supposed to forget they had never consented. I told her that success does not make deception harmless. She said she knew. By then, I had heard those words enough to understand that knowing something after consequences arrive is not the same as respecting it before. The months between the divorce filing and the final settlement were not a straight line from exposure to accountability because people who have built their lives around controlling the story do not suddenly become honest when the story turns against them. Madison tried apology, anger, silence, legal threats, public grief, and finally a version of reconciliation that depended on me signing a statement prepared by her public relations lawyer. She brought the document to my house on a Sunday afternoon while Luke was at work. It said that I had known about the fundraiser, supported its purpose, and later became confused about how the money would be distributed because of medication after surgery. It also said Madison had offered direct financial help before the operation, but I declined because I preferred borrowing from Luke. None of that was true. The lawyer had softened the lies by surrounding them with accurate details, including the date of my surgery, the diagnosis, and the fact that I was prescribed pain medication, which made the statement look less like fiction and more like a disagreement between relatives. Madison said I did not have to say she paid the bill, only that she tried to help and that the fundraiser began with good intentions. I asked what would happen if I refused. She said nothing, but her face changed. I asked again. She admitted that 2 brands had made renewal offers conditional on resolving the charity complaint, and that her insurance company might not cover the civil settlement if the campaign appeared intentionally unauthorized. I told her she was asking a cancer patient to say medication made him confused so she could protect contracts. She said I was using the most uncharitable interpretation possible. I said there was no charitable interpretation of a false statement. She cried, called me vindictive, and asked why I could show endless patience to Luke while expecting perfection from her. I reminded her that Luke had not asked me to lie for him, had not filmed my hospital room, had not collected money in my name, and had not accused me of causing his problems when I refused. She tore the document in half, then immediately gathered the pieces because it contained her lawyer's notes. That small movement, destroying something dramatically and then remembering it might matter legally, captured the way Madison operated during those months better than any speech could. Before leaving, she looked toward the hallway table where I kept a framed photograph of Ellen and said her mother would be ashamed of me for abandoning my own child. I told her not to use a dead woman as a witness she could control. She slapped the table hard enough to knock the photograph onto the floor. The glass cracked across Ellen's face. Madison froze. I expected an apology, but she stared at the broken frame as if the damage had happened independently of her hand, then said she would pay for it. I told her some things were not repaired by paying the amount printed on a receipt. After she left, I sat on the floor because bending still hurt and picked glass from the carpet, one piece at a time. Luke arrived later, saw the frame, and did not ask whether Madison meant to break it. He simply found a screwdriver, removed the backing, cleaned the photograph, and drove to a store for replacement glass. That evening he told me Madison had taken 2 pieces of Ellen's jewelry from my bedroom during the week of the surgery. I thought he was mistaken. The jewelry box held little of real value, mostly a gold chain, a pair of small diamond earrings, Ellen's wedding ring, and an emerald pendant inherited from her grandmother. Madison had worn the pendant at her wedding, then returned it to me because I wanted to keep Ellen's belongings together. Luke had seen the pendant in a behind-the-scenes photograph from one of Madison's shoots. When he asked about it during their marriage, she said I had given it to her permanently. I had not. I checked the box. The pendant and diamond earrings were gone. Madison first claimed I had forgotten lending them to her, which was especially cruel after she had just asked me to sign a statement saying medication affected my memory. When I demanded their return, she said the jewelry was with a stylist in New York and could not be retrieved until the campaign invoice was settled. The stylist eventually called me after Luke found her contact information. Madison had left the jewelry as security for $6,000 in unpaid wardrobe rentals, promising that her company would pay after the fundraiser released money. The stylist had no idea the pieces belonged to me and was horrified when I described the situation. I paid nothing. My attorney sent proof of ownership, the stylist returned the jewelry, and Madison's company received a demand for the wardrobe balance. When I held the pendant again, I felt anger in a form more physical than anything connected to the fundraiser, because money can be replaced, and even reputations can recover. But Madison had taken something that belonged to her dead mother and placed it in a stranger's hands as if family memory were another asset available for short-term use. She later said she always intended to return it. That sentence had become her defense for nearly everything. She intended to repay Luke. She intended to tell him about Victor. She intended to give fundraiser money to me after expenses. She intended to return the jewelry. She intended to disclose the guarantee before he signed. Every lie was presented as a temporary bridge to a future moment when honesty would become convenient. Luke's family entered the conflict after the fight with Victor. His mother, Diane, worked at a public elementary school cafeteria and had never been impressed by Madison's career, not because she disliked modeling, but because Madison once filmed Diane's small kitchen without permission and used it in a holiday video about returning to humble roots. Diane watched the cropped fight video, called Luke, listened to him explain what happened, and then drove to Madison's building with the intention of confronting her. Luke stopped her in the parking lot. Diane was 62, 5 feet tall, and angry enough to ignore the fact that a confrontation could damage her son's case. She shouted at Madison from beside her car, asking how a woman could let her husband sell his tools for her father's cancer surgery and then call him abusive for doing it. Madison's phone appeared immediately. She began recording. Luke stepped between them and told his mother to leave. Diane slapped his arm, not hard, and accused him of protecting Madison again. Madison laughed. Diane lunged toward her, and Luke caught his mother around the shoulders before she reached the sidewalk. The entire scene lasted less than a minute, but someone filmed it from a balcony, and by evening another video circulated showing Luke restraining an older woman while Madison stood behind security. The caption claimed Luke's family had attempted to attack her. Diane cried when she realized her anger had created more material for Madison's story. Luke did not blame her, but he stopped telling his family details until the divorce ended because every person who loved him wanted to act, and every action gave Madison another angle. That was one of the ugliest lessons of the year. Truth did not automatically protect you. Sometimes the person willing to publish first gained several days in which facts looked like excuses. My own brother, Samuel, made matters worse in a quieter way. He believed Madison had behaved terribly, but he also believed family scandals should stay private, and he kept telling relatives that both sides had made mistakes. When I asked which mistake of Luke's compared to an affair, unauthorized fundraising, or a false abuse claim, Samuel said selling joint assets without a spouse's agreement was still wrong. The motorcycle had been purchased before the marriage and remained titled only to Luke. The tools were his. The emergency account contained his side job income. Samuel knew that after I explained it, yet he continued using the phrase both sides because neutrality made family gatherings easier. At Thanksgiving, he invited Madison, Luke, and me without telling any of us the others had accepted. Luke arrived first and nearly left when he saw Madison's car. I told him I would leave too, but he said running would make the entire day about us. We entered together. Madison sat beside Samuel's wife with her hands folded and a pale expression that made her look fragile. She had lost weight after the miscarriage and wore no makeup. For the first hour, everyone spoke about football, weather, and food with the strained politeness of people standing around a covered hole. Then Samuel raised a glass and said the family had endured enough division and should use the holiday to forgive. Nobody had asked him to do that. Madison began crying. Luke stared at his plate. I asked Samuel whether forgiveness meant Madison would correct the abuse accusation publicly. He said Thanksgiving was not the time for legal details. Madison said she had never called Luke abusive, only described how she felt. Luke took out his phone, opened the post where she used the phrase financial and emotional abuse, and placed it on the table. She said context mattered. Diane, who had also been invited without warning, asked whether context mattered when Madison showed her own bruised hand and let people assume Luke caused it. Madison said she had been afraid during the marriage. Luke asked why she asked him to guarantee a beauty company if she feared him. That was the first time most relatives heard about the draft guarantee. The room erupted. Samuel told everyone to lower their voices. Madison accused Luke of sharing confidential business information. Diane called Victor a pimp in a suit. Samuel's wife began clearing plates even though nobody had finished eating. I sat there watching the family attempt to turn factual questions into bad manners, because bad manners were easier to condemn. Madison finally stood and said she had lost a baby, a marriage, and most of her career, yet nobody cared whether she survived. Luke stood too, but his voice remained calm. He said he cared whether she survived, which was why he took her to the hospital, stayed through the miscarriage, and refused to release private medical details even after she implied he caused the loss. He also said caring did not mean returning to a life where she could rewrite every choice as something done to her. Madison slapped him again. This time everyone saw it. The sound stopped the room. Luke did not raise his hand. He took his coat and left while the table watched Madison realize there was no edited clip, no missing beginning, and no audience she could choose. Samuel asked her to leave. That slap ended the family's habit of calling the conflict complicated because everyone had seen the same thing at the time and nobody could soften it for her afterward. I am 50 now. The scar on my side has faded but still pulls when the weather changes. Luke is no longer legally my son-in-law, yet he comes by on Sundays, helps with repairs I could probably manage alone, and refuses to let me pay full price when his company does electrical work at the warehouse. Madison visits too, though never at the same time unless there is a family event. She and Luke can speak politely now. He does not hate her. He also does not return when she becomes lonely, which may be the clearest boundary anyone in our family has ever kept. People hear the title of this story and focus on the contrast because it is easy to understand. My successful model daughter refused $7,399 for cancer surgery, while my struggling son-in-law sold what little he owned and gave me everything. That is true, but it leaves out the part that matters most. Money did not reveal who loved me and who did not. Madison loved me in a frightened, selfish, damaged way that allowed her to protect her image before my life. Luke loved me through action even when the action cost him something and brought him no public reward. The difference was not blood, income, fame, or success. The difference was what each person believed another human life was allowed to cost them. Madison believed love should never interrupt the story she had built about herself. Luke believed love meant showing up when the story became ugly, expensive, and private. I survived because the cancer was found early, the surgeon was skilled, and a man with almost nothing refused to let me wait. I also survived the family damage because I finally stopped measuring loyalty by titles. Daughter, husband, father, son-in-law. Those words describe relationships, but they do not guarantee character. Character appeared in a cashier's check bought with sold tools, in a chair beside a hospital bed, in meals cooked badly, in a loan repaid carefully, and in the decision to tell the truth, even when telling it destroyed a marriage. Madison once told me that Luke had given me money because he needed to feel like a hero. Maybe part of him did. Most people want their sacrifices to mean something. The difference is that he made the sacrifice before there was an audience. She built the audience before she made the sacrifice. That is why, when people ask who became my real family during cancer, I do not say I replaced my daughter with her husband. Life is not that clean, and love does not move from one name to another like money between accounts. I say my daughter showed me how easily love can become performance when fear and ambition are left unchecked, while the man she treated as unsuccessful showed me that generosity has nothing to do with how much remains after you give. He gave me everything. She had more than enough and gave me a story. I needed the surgery. I also needed the truth. I got both.